Mobile is on track to become the largest player in the digital ecosystem, and it's predicted to represent 70% of all media spending by 2018. A multi-device world gives consumers more touchpoints than ever before and offers marketers increasing opportunities to reach audiences as they research, browse, and purchase online. But the path to purchase is no longer linear, and instead mirrors a flight map as consumers move between devices and screens.
Ten years ago, there was no problem because most users were only using a single digitally connected device. Now we have tablets and smartphones and wearables and TVs all on top of the computers that we use every day. And for a marketer, that makes understanding the user's behavior very difficult.
So mobile provides this sort of dimensional view of a consumer and the ability to connect with them multiple times throughout their day. Whether it be television, whether it be display, whether it be visitation to a physical store, mobile provides this unifying mechanism for attribution. For marketers, that's an incredibly powerful new platform.
The biggest challenge that marketers face when it comes to this multi-screen journey is understanding and anticipating where the user is in their day and showing them the right message at the right time. In a study we recently did, 71% of consumers said they had a negative reaction if they got an inconsistent message across devices. And so marketers really need to focus on finding that user, understanding them across all of their devices, and making that message consistent.
You have to take into account the different devices people are using, or you'll have an incomplete picture. Users are seeing a stream of media. And to really understand performance, you have to determine how to fractionally allocate credit accurately across that stream of media.
So think about the ability to run a mobile campaign, target 8 million devices, each one in a contextually relevant, really meaningful way, and then be able to measure the effectiveness of that campaign, of that messaging, to drive those consumers to a particular store. If you understand mobile, you can now understand the consumer and their interactions across these different touch points.
If you're a marketer that's buying a lot of mobile activity, more than likely that conversion's not happening on the mobile device. So you're driving great influence in the purchase process, but the conversion's happening somewhere else. If you're using a last touch, last click model, and you're not taking into account cross-device influences, you're never going to be able to do mobile marketing well. If you're really looking at mobile as a channel that you want to use, you need to have a measurement platform that works with your media efforts to ensure that you understand the real credit that mobile's getting.
Thank you very much. So let me introduce the panelists here. Let's start with Nick. Nick is with Tapad. Come have a seat, please, all of you. Nick's with Tapad. Tapad provide a way, and we'll talk about it a little bit tonight, to connect people to their multiple devices. And you used to run product there, but now your title is?
Global Head of Strategy. Very, very important role.
Very important role. He's a very important guy. Next up, we have Paul Pellman. Now, we've done, I don't know how many of these panels. This is the third series. We did the first one solely on attribution, the second one on sort of fraud, suspicious activity, and this one on mobile. You've been on the first and the third over 3 years. You must have done 20 of these things with us.
Not quite,
but it's getting close. So welcome, thank you. When Paul started doing these things with us, he was with a firm called Adometry, CEO of Adometry. And he sold to Google a year ago?
Just a little over a year ago.
A little over a year ago, so congratulations still. Yeah. And so this is now Google's attribution technology. And of course, Google's got a big focus on mobile. And part of the idea of this panel is we always try to take a couple of big companies and a couple of startups in the space, which leads me to Duncan, who is with PlaceIQ. And Duncan's company, PlaceIQ, really focus a lot on location and what you can do with that, both in terms of attribution and targeting and reporting and analytics. So great group of people. The format we have for this evening is I'm going to start the panel off with sort of 3 very easy sort of set the table questions, and then we go into some more interesting ones. And after each of the interesting ones, I'm going to go out to you as a panel. I got a mic here, and I hope you will ask questions. Without you asking questions, we probably won't answer your questions, so please do ask them. All right, so let's get going. Oh, sorry. I'm going to start with you, Paul. let's start with a nice, easy one.
Great.
Mobile. Mobile actually encompasses a lot of things, right? So I used to have a little mobile device, and now I've got a quite large mobile device, and I have tablets. Differences between the two, should we care about them? All the same thing?
I think when you think from a response standpoint, I mean, the vehicles, the different platforms, whether you're a mobile phone or your tablet, I mean, the screen size is different. And so how you use them based on the screen size, where you're using them, it just creates a different experience, right? Mobile device is something I typically have with me all the time. I'm using it a lot of times when I'm waiting for something, at least the stuff that I can see ads against. Whereas the tablet is something I use more when I'm at home or in a location. And so I think you have to take those different aspects into account, both in the media that you're serving on those different devices, and then also the conversion activity that happens. I think conversion activity that happens on a tablet is actually different than the conversion activity that happens on a mobile device or on a mobile phone.
Right. I mean, I think one of the misconceptions there is everyone thinks of a mobile device or a mobile smartphone at least as a poor advertising experience, where in reality, if you show a 300 by 250 on a mobile phone, that's effectively an interstitial, right? You get the entire screen, it's a very personal device, and people are seeing a lot of that. But that doesn't always translate into conversions, because even if you were to click on that, if you're trying to buy a product or trying to do something where you need to transact, it's a really hard device to transact on.
But the tablet's different than that. That's where the
Agreed. But the tablet advertising experience isn't as immersive.
That's right.
And so it's an interesting dichotomy where the smaller form factor may actually be better for getting across a message, but it's going to be much worse for actually transacting against that message.
So let's continue to dive down that a little bit about what about, so on my phone, I've got at least two different ways to transact, right?
Yeah.
Mobile web, apps. Differences?
Yeah, well, they're different, first of all, and I think a lot of people miss that. People talk about mobile as if it's a single device, and so I'm tracking this person on their mobile phone. In reality, they may be using an app, and that's an entirely different ecosystem than when they're using the mobile web. Even when you're using an app, oftentimes when you click on a link, it brings you into a web browser within that app, which is completely different than the system's web browser, and so it's incredibly complicated. And so, our industry talks about things in very simple terms because it makes it very easy to be digestible on a panel or in an ad exchanger article or something. But in reality, when you talk about mobile and when you talk about cross-device, you're really looking at something that's much more complicated than saying I've got device 1 and device 2 and I've got them related. Really, you need to take the ecosystems that live within each device and tie those together, and then tie those to the ecosystems that live together in other devices, and that's a very, very difficult proposition.
So moving from that, Duncan, and this is the last of the easy questions, they get harder from here. What about the different media types? So you've got apps, you've got mobile web, you've got tablets, you've got mobile phones. How should we be thinking about creative types?
Yeah, so I think we see in mobile, as you guys all see as well, there's typical sort of industry lag in terms of technology, data, opportunity to target, and creative catching up to that. So as we all know, you look at mobile and you've got this kind of hub of data and activity. You now can be bridged back to desktop cookies into CRM systems, into enterprise systems, and all the kind of additional data we talk about. And of course, these devices, as we know, they're location aware, they're contextually aware, people have them with them all the time. 150 times per day, I guess, is the new average stat I've seen for how often people will check their devices. So the opportunity to message to people with the creative and the messaging that's really relevant is huge, but we still see this sort of lag in terms of, as Nick's saying, the typical industry format of, look, let's shove somebody a banner ad and then maybe targeting, but we don't necessarily take into account the context of that user. If you stumble out of a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning, showing somebody an ad for a family holiday, it's probably not a relevant time to do that. An advertisement for a way to get home safely or fast food, much more relevant. I'm in a Walmart, I'm in a Target, I'm in a purchase funnel that's very specific. You've got an opportunity to not just advertise to me, to push me a message that's probably really relevant to my use case, right? If I'm standing in Best Buy thinking, shit, there's so many TVs I'm trying to figure out here, having an advertisement that's sort of content-based to help me with that challenge, I think is tremendous. Look, we start to see the beginnings of this, but I think that the challenge here is that in terms of creative catching up to that, there's formats, there's standards, there's this idea of being able to scale that, but I do believe that mobile provides this incredibly multi-dimensional canvas that has amazing creative abilities, and we're only just starting to scrape the surface.
Right.
I think one of the mistakes that we've made as an industry, and I'm going to be in the minority here, is everyone talks about mobile first, right? So traditionally everyone built creatives and experiences for the desktop, and early on they said we're just going to shrink those and they're going to be mobile. And everyone realizes that kind of doesn't work because you can't fit as much copy, you can't fit as many images in mobile. And so everyone said, okay, now we're going to build things for mobile, and then for desktop we're just going to make them a lot bigger. I think that's just as big of a mistake, right? I think what you really need to look is at the context that the user is in and give them a creative experience that fits that context. So maybe in mobile it's a swipeable experience. It doesn't mean you're going to build a bigger experience on desktop and hope they figure out how to swipe on their screen. That's just not realistic. And so really trying to understand the context that the user is in and building an experience for them, and not just saying we're either going to make it small and big or we're going to make it big or small. It's much more complicated to have a successful strategy there.
So that's the end of the easy questions. And I wanted to start with those easy questions because it's a much bigger problem than I think people realize. So there's probably not a lot that you didn't know already here, but you have different types of creative, you've got different types of devices, you've got different things on those devices, and your strategy has to take all of those into consideration. So as we dive deeper, keep that in mind. So we're going to start now with the real questions. So you just touched on it there, which is that people historically have thought of a mobile strategy, right? So you put together, you've got this strategy going on, you've got a television strategy, you've got a digital strategy, and you've got a separate mobile strategy. What do you think about the difference between a mobile strategy and I'll call it an audience strategy or a cross-device strategy?
Yeah. So
they're different things.
Yeah, I'm going to contradict myself because earlier I said you want to have a different mobile creative strategy from a desktop creative strategy, and I actually think that's true. But I think when you think of your marketing strategy and your overall goals of a campaign or of reaching the right user, that needs to be global. You need to understand who your target audience is, you need to understand what the product that you're selling them is, and you need to understand how to bring those two things together, and I think you need to think of that holistically. So, I wouldn't even just talk about desktop versus mobile versus tablet. I would include television, I would include digital out of home, I would include print, really the entire thing. You need to have a strategy. And then when you look to execute against that strategy, you need to understand how each of those things actually interplay with each other. And so what we see a lot from agencies today is we've got a mobile budget, we've got a desktop budget, we've got a TV budget, and they're all siloed and they're all different teams and they don't like each other, and it's a shit show, right? And so,
not in Detroit,
no,
but everywhere else.
outside.
Everywhere else.
As James says, there's great things happening in Detroit.
Thank you.
But I think a lot of those teams need to come together and really understand the interplay between each of them. And it's not a zero-sum game. It's not, if there's $1 for television and $1 for digital, that we're going to shift those $2. You can actually show that the combination of mobile and desktop and TV and all these other things actually drive up the value of each of them. But I think you need to have a holistic strategy. I think you need to look at your marketing spend holistically. And then once you get into each of the channels, you need to tailor that creative experience and that call to action, et cetera, for that channel, understanding there's going to be some interplay with the other channels as well.
I also think it's easier to do that now. So, I think what Nick is talking about is a little bit of a panacea. It's really, right now, the vehicle for buying TV media is very different than the vehicles for buying digital media. That will ultimately change. And when that actually happens, then I think that Nick's vision, what he talks about, will be something that's more in reality. When you have addressable TV, people are able to buy media, the same way that they're buying digital. But within kind of the broader digital channels that includes mobile now, you are seeing the ability to kind of transact and measure that now more comprehensively and more holistically. And so that's the aspect I look at when people think of a mobile strategy. A lot of times they're thinking just with blinders on, saying I have mobile media driving a mobile activity. And the reality is that's not happening. I see an ad for an auto insurance company on my mobile device. Everything Nick said about creative, I actually think it's a great ad experience on the mobile device because there's no clutter. You get, on desktop, you got lots of clutter. It's 15 ad units on a page. You don't have that in mobile. But the facts are, when I see an auto insurance ad on my mobile device, I'm not going to use the form factor of the mobile device to fill out a lengthy auto insurance quote. I'm going to go back to my desktop to do that. And so because conversions are happening across devices, because you can buy this media now a little bit more agnostically across devices, it lends itself to a more holistic strategy. And that really is what is meant by cross-device.
Yeah.
And I think there's two things here, right? So if you sort of break apart what these guys are talking about, there's this idea of, look, nobody imagines that every sort of planning department is ready to fuse out of home and print and TV and mobile and display. But if you actually think about the revolution that's really happening, it's this unified view of a user, as you alluded to, the audience, the consumer-centric understanding, and not having a mobile and a display and a print strategy that's siloed based upon the consumers there, but there's a horizontal strategy that understands consumers as, hey, these individuals spread across all of these. And that is happening now, right? That is just about here now. So the same person that watches that addressable TV household is the same person who walks past the billboard, who gets the print subscription, et cetera. And you can define your audience planning there. We don't expect all the planning departments and all of the, those vertical groups to necessarily fold together. And you see it in Google to some extent, right? Whereby a new technology comes up. When mobile came up, well, mobile's its own standalone, and then, well, it's back into a pod, and then sometimes it's out again. It's very difficult to figure out how to sort of industrialize that mechanism. But from an understanding consumers, that, I believe, we are deeply into that being horizontal.
So let me ask a question to the audience, all of you. So how many of you here work only on mobile?
Uh-oh. Oh, it's okay.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
It's all right. We won't blame
So
you.
we have at least one honest Midwesterner in the audience. And how many of you work on mobile and desktop strategy? So that's good. So the trend is going in that direction. I mean, but I can tell you, we all see campaigns that are still desktop.
Well, I think it
mobile
also
focused.
is you have to talk to your clients about this
Yeah.
too, right? You need to get your clients thinking in this mindset.
Well, I guess the follow-up question is,
Advertising.
even if you work on mobile and desktop, how often are the budgets for mobile and desktop very rigid? And so we're going to spend this much on mobile and this much on desktop versus really having fluidity of budget and saying, okay, I'm going to understand how this campaign is running over time, and I can move money from mobile to desktop and vice versa into other channels because...
Well, good question. How many of you have fluidity between those two budgets? How many of you do not have fluidity between those two budgets? I got a half over there.
Yeah, but isn't the other question, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you think about what we're saying, the other question is not you just work on mobile, you just work on display. It's do you plan your audience based... If you just plan your audience based upon cookies, then you've got a siloed strategy. If you plan your audience based upon CRM data or mobile data or whatever it may be, then you've now got a unified sort of audience creation. You might just choose to deploy that on desktop, and that's fine. I don't think we're saying just because you deploy on desktop, that's bad. But the audience should be constructed from more signals outside of desktop.
So let's take it one step further, and then I'm going to go to the audience for questions. So, great. So the audience agrees, we agree, audience first, channel second. How do you get the data, right? So that's wonderful. I know that I can get my data from within Google.
I'm just waiting for the Facebook girl would have been just raising her hand for that question if she were here.
But so sad.
We'll point out the deficiencies.
And she would have been wrong.
We'll point out the deficiencies in their data.
So why don't we talk first from Tapad? How do you get the data to allow these people to target individuals across their devices rather than just
Is
siloed?
this probabilistic versus deterministic?
It
Yes,
is.
it is.
All right.
Under a different guise.
So, there's a couple different ways that you can understand that a user may own multiple devices. There are a set of folks, I think Google is probably one that's in this category, the Facebook woman would have talked about this as well, that are really tied to what is called deterministic data, which is an awful name and no one should use it, but it's ad tech and we come up with awful names for things. And basically what they mean by deterministic data is a user has logged in across two devices, right? I like to call it a strong signal. If you have the same user that's logged in across two devices, it's a very strong signal that that user may have some relation to those two devices. Now, you may have a tablet, which is a shared device, and suddenly you've got another user that could log into that device. You could have people with multiple logins. Our head of data science at Tapad says he has 12 Gmail logins. He is a shady dude. But to Google, he looks like 12 separate people, right? Because he's got 12 different logins. And so it's by no means perfect data set. Tapad has some set of that data, and we actually use that data to help validate our models, but the primary data that Tapad uses is what the industry has chosen to call probabilistic data, which I again think is a shitty name for what I like to call weak signals, but I understand why no one calls it, our head of marketing is like weak signals. That kind of makes it sound kind of wimpy. And basically what that is people are creatures of habit. So if you can collect enough data on a number of devices about the behaviors on those devices, you can actually start to infer two devices belong to the same person. So device proximity. I'm in Detroit right now. Both my laptop and my phone are also in Detroit. They're connecting to the same Wi-Fi in my hotel. They're connected to the same cell towers when we're here, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also a Buffalo sports fan. There's not many Buffalo sports fans in Detroit, so I'm reading Sabres news and Bills news, right? That sort of sets me apart across all my devices. And there's a variety of time-based clues. I tend to wake up at the same time every day. I commute the same time when all my devices go from a home network to a cellular network, right? So we're collecting billions and billions of these data points every day, and it basically gives us a really strong model that we can say, hey, these 2 or these 3 or these 10 devices all belong to this person, and it really gives us a unique way to do what the Googles and the Facebooks of the world do at much greater scale.
Yeah, so you kind of stole my thunder because you defined deterministic for me, but I'll add a little bit more characteristic. Nick described it very well. So deterministic is logged in data. I think we at Adometry were really at the forefront of bringing cross-device data into an attribution engine, the deterministic data. And Nick's right, deterministic can be very accurate, but you have to have scale. And there's really only 2 folks that have that scale. It's really Google and Facebook. Even Twitter, with the volume they have, don't necessarily have the scale that they need to have. Now, just because the Facebook person isn't here, the one thing I'll say about Facebook data, it's actually almost working against them now, is they're so strong in mobile now that they're starting to see a pretty significant amount of their audience that actually never logs in on their PC anymore. They only log into Facebook on their mobile device. And so that's the weakness of deterministic, is it tends to miss connections. If I don't log in to my services across my different devices, I'll miss that connection. Whereas probabilistic tends to miss error a little bit more on the other side, where it's inferring connections through all the stuff that Nick talked about, so it's going to tend to kind of make inferences that devices are connected when maybe they're not. It's the difference between false positives and false negatives.
All right, so let's go to the audience for questions. Questions so far? Come on, someone. No. Yes, yeah, thank you so much. You broke the ice. You get free drinks for the rest of the evening. Hang on, let me just make sure it's on. There we go.
Thank you. You guys explained deterministic and probabilistic. I didn't even say that right. But so what do you do with that? I mean, why do we need to define them? I understand what they are, but what's the difference in how you might use them? Or as a marketer, why do I care one data source versus the other?
Well, so Google's only going to make its data available for targeting and media buying within the Google network. We're able to, because
you stole my thunder. That's my line.
I know. Hey, you steal mine, I'm going to steal yours. So there's limitations. You want to use Facebook's data, you're only going to be able to use it in Facebook's walled garden. Someone like Tapad provides data that can be used across multiple vendors, like people like Magnetics. So you want to buy Magnetics' great search retargeting insights, and you want to buy that across devices. They leverage Tapad data to do that.
True story.
Great. See, even helping James out.
Thank you.
The one thing we are able to do, just to get through misconceptions, we are able to use the device graph for attribution across all the media we see from a client. So from a measurement standpoint, really I'd say the device graphs for both of us are to a certain degree interchangeable.
But I'm going to weigh in because I never do, and we're missing one panelist, so I'm going to just sit here.
Answer a question.
And just, I agree with you that you shouldn't really care. The only thing that happens is that when companies get really big so that their deterministic data matters, they stop letting you use it outside their own platform. But I agree that actually you shouldn't care which one they use unless you think that one is better than the other, and both of these gentlemen will say that theirs is great, so I don't think we'll get there tonight.
But trust me, I would break his leg for his data set. But,
right now,
metaphorically, right?
To make that happen.
But I think a little bit deeper into the question, we basically put it in 3 different buckets of what you can do with the data. So let's assume that you understand, you have a perfect data set, whether it's his or it's mine or someone else's, that all of these devices belong to the same person. You basically can take the marketing techniques that we've been using on single devices for the last 15 years and apply them across multiple devices. So targeting is an obvious one. So someone does something on device A that makes you think you want to serve them an ad, you can serve them that ad on device B. Analytics is the second, and that includes attribution. So I just want to understand how users behave. How many unique users did I reach? Today that number is grossly overinflated because if you get the same person on 2 devices, they're counted as 2 people. And I think the third one is personalization. So again, you know something about a user from device one, and you want to show them personalized content, maybe not as an ad experience, but an on-site experience, a landing page, et cetera, et cetera. You can now do that with this data. So really, cross-device or people-based marketing doesn't really create new use cases per se. It just makes the use cases you're already working with much more closer to reality than they are today.
I think one of the, to continue the theme from earlier, what these guys are talking about obviously is the ability to conflate a user between mobile and display. Yeah. Look, and that's interesting in digital, but consumers don't spend just their time in mobile and display. They sit in front of television stations, they're exposed to magazines, they sit at home and get direct mail, they walk past billboards. So I think one of the true promises of mobile is the ability to now, the mobile device is the ultimate deduper, right? It is key to an individual, it doesn't get shared very often, you have it with you all the time, the identifier gets reset if you sell that device, so you can use that mobile device as a beacon to be able to figure out, okay, this mobile device now dwells in a household, is attached to an IP address, it's attached to this television, it walks past these billboards, it works in this area, it is now connected to all these other mediums. So for me, the really interesting, compelling thing about this is to go beyond the probabilistic, deterministic of joining mobile and display, which is important, but think about how can mobile now unify the rest of the world so I can understand how to bring in all these other mediums and say, this is the same consumer that's exposed across all these other mediums. That's the really compelling thing.
And I get really excited about location. We're not doing this in Adometry yet, but you now can start using that location beacon as almost a proxy for conversion. And that's some of the interesting conversations Duncan and I have had where this beacon is now residing within an area that obviously indicates that they're in an auto dealership. So that would actually indicate something.
He is stealing thunder. We're going to go to that in a minute because I want to go to something in between. When I was out there, someone asked me to ask you guys this question. So,
true story?
True story. What about this recent acquisition of AOL by Verizon? So how should
what?
the...
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Verizon.
So how should all the marketers in this room think about it? So AOL wasn't a particularly mobile-first company. Now they're owned by the largest carrier in the country. How should everyone think about that? What's going to change? Anything? Something? Nick, you want to go first?
I'm asking myself a lot of these same questions. So Ad Exchanger yesterday, I think, did an article about the cross-device implications of Verizon acquiring AOL. I'm sure there's going to be implications, right? AOL is a media company and they have very strong media properties. I think the story is more about Verizon wants to become more of a media company through their Fios, and they're going to start doing some OTT things. They acquired OnQ from Intel, which is an internet-only television. I think it's a lot about Verizon wanting to become a media company, and I think that's great. I don't think it's a terrible strategy. I think they're going to have some challenges there because that's not their DNA. But I don't see it as they wanted to get into mobile, and AOL was the leader in mobile. Like, if you'd asked this question 3 days ago about what do you guys think about AOL and mobile, like, we wouldn't be just praising AOL, like, oh my God, they've got mobile figured out.
Come on.
But right, exactly. When's the last time anyone used MapQuest? But the acquisition happened, and now suddenly we think it's a big mobile play. And I don't know. Does anyone disagree with that?
I think it's a big mobile play from the standpoint of, I think it's Verizon looking at the technology that AOL has, and it's going to allow them to monetize the mobile assets that they have. The mobile experience they have. I think everything that's been written or some of the discussions around using this deterministic data is a bit of a red herring because I think the privacy issues around that are massive. I don't know does anyone remember a company called Nebuad a few years ago? No one? Yeah. Does anyone remember Nebuad? Nebuad was like an early ad network. This about 5-6 years ago. Well-funded startup. They had relationships with all the ISPs to basically do targeting based on your ISP data. Inside the firewall type stuff, and they were on a rocket ship, and basically within about 24-hour period they were out of business because all of a sudden all the ISPs and the telecom companies realized that there's huge privacy issues on their hands.
This is deep packet inspection stuff?
Oh yeah, all that stuff. So all this stuff around, they have phenomenal deterministic data down to knowing way more about you at a PII basis than just about any company. And I think the thought that that data is seamlessly going to be used to tie these devices together to serve ads and do all this great stuff, I think there's a lot that needs to be figured out. And I don't think that's at the top of Verizon's list on why they bought AOL. So I think that aspect's probably being overblown a little bit right now.
So I have a pretty different, strong opinion on this because I lived through this with. So some of you remember AT&T AdWorks, right? So my opinion on this is that you look at these big guys, AT&T and Verizon, and for many, many years they've seen the future that, look, we don't want to be commodified into dumb pipes, right? There's all these people extracting the value out of data and advertising and targeting and consumer relationships. And we've got this, business that mints money, but ultimately consumers mostly hate us and they don't trust us. And we don't offer them anything of value other than the ability to connect a call and now the ability to deliver content through pipes that we have no clue about and we don't control. So some time ago, both of these guys set out fairly hard to say, we've got to change that. We want to protect our future. We have to own these assets. We have to understand the consumers. We have to own advertising. We have to take these probabilistic data assets and monetize them and understand them. And AT&T set about and they built this group called AT&T AdWorks, which had many things in it. But one of the big pieces they built was a mobile cross-device company, fully deterministic, TV, display, mobile, amazing data. And they actually, the reason I know, because they went out in the market and they say, we're going to compete with PlaceIQ. We've got all this location data. We're going to compete with these guys. And, I was like, well, this will be interesting. 350 people. And then one day, the CEO of AT&T woke up and said, what the hell is this on my balance sheet? These 350 people, in San Francisco and New York, and said, shut it down. Shut it down. I don't want it. Literally, this is a true story. AT&T AdWorks completely disbanded, other than the TV piece. And then we get an RFI from AT&T AdWorks 3 months later. We're looking for vendors to build us a mobile DSP. You're trying to build the same thing again. And it became very clear in my mind that these guys will never, ever be able to internally build an asset that they can manage in their own culture to monetize their data. And to the point earlier, I think partnering is a disaster as well. They've tried to partner and do it. So look at Turn, the zombie cookie thing. They foolishly have said Verizon built this thing called PMI, Precision Market Insights, where they took their own data and they punted it across to Turn. It didn't end out well if you looked at the news over the last 6 months. So then Verizon said, Jesus, we're going to do this the right way. We have to build a company at scale with strong leadership that knows how to execute in ad tech and data, and we have to give them our assets. We have to let them run independently, and they will have the DNA, the chops, the right type of people, and the talent to do this. We cannot bring it in-house. We can't partner. We have to own it. So it's about mobile, it's about video, it's about data, but more than anything, it's about them having a big enough asset that it controls itself, that they don't control it, that can run independently. That is my firm belief, that's what the acquisition's all about.
I mean, I think it's very akin to the Comcast NBCU. Obviously, NBC was more on the television side and less on the digital side, but it's, all these companies want to start owning the content and not just being the pipes for the content. It remains to be seen if it'll be sort of managed as well as the Comcast NBCU thing, or if it, is a three-headed dragon that goes off into nowhere.
All right, let's go back to the audience. Questions on that or other things we've covered so far? Questions? One over here? Yeah, sure.
Sorry, the term you used, proxy for conversion. Love that term. I'm going to steal it. So, but how far do you think, for all three of you overall, that we start to get into that proxy for conversion where we're almost reaching out to prove conversions in areas that might not be 100% correct, and it goes to that probabilistic data? How far is too far? Is there a too far when we get into that proxy?
Well, that's to me, and these guys can weigh in. I always think if you're marketing and targeting, and I'm not going to use a probabilistic term because I don't think it's totally fair, but having a degree of error in the data is okay, right? If I'm trying to reach people who, perhaps want to go to McDonald's and maybe because they've been to other, and I can have some 20% degree of wastage. If you're going to want to accurately measure and attribute all the people that went to a McDonald's, you can't be 80%. You can't really be 85%. You've got to be in the 90 or higher percent because the margin of error, et cetera. So when it comes to analytics, measurement, I think you absolutely have to hold yourself to a very different standard. And you can, probabilistic, deterministic, you do whatever you want, but you have to hold yourself to a different standard. And I think that's the problem you see, people using the same techniques and the same accuracy they're used for targeting and marketing, for analytics and measurement. I don't legitimately think you should or could do that.
I totally agree with that. We run into that all the time. When you do targeting, you can deal with a certain amount of waste. You can't have that in analytics. You have to have more precise data. Getting to another aspect to your question around using some of this data as a proxy for conversion, I think, and I think some of the stuff Duncan does where they can tell the phone is in a location, therefore it means let's count that as a conversion. That can be incredibly accurate. So it meets the accuracy threshold he's talking about. There's a different question, which is that a good proxy for conversion? Does that event matter? And I look at that from the standpoint of that's no different than what we do today. So in the automotive space, since we're in Detroit, going into an auto dealership is a proxy for conversion. You could say, is that accurate or not?
It's a lower funnel metric that's meaningful.
I look at that. It's no different than some of the higher funnel metrics we track on a website for an automotive company where we're tracking, they downloaded a brochure, they configured a car. Let's track those as conversion items. So, and I look at all of that is those might not be an accurate indicator of the ultimate car purchase, but it's very accurate. We can very definitively say they did it or didn't do it, and it helps understand the path that people are going through to buy a product that has an incredibly long purchase funnel. And so in that sense, I think it makes sense to experiment with some of these new capabilities. And I think through measuring that all the way through to conversion to the actual purchase of a car, for example, I think you'll be able to discern, is that really a good upper funnel conversion continue to track.
And I think that the key there, right, and this, we've been doing that for 3 years, we'll talk about in a minute, but is it gets sophisticated, you've got to categorize the conversion. So if you're a CPG company and somebody went into Target or Long's Drugs, moderately interesting, that's not a conversion event. If you're an automotive dealership and somebody came to the automotive floor, interesting, lower funnel KPI, not a conversion event. If, however, you're a casual dining company, you're QSR, you're a hotel, you're a state that's looking to drive people, the location itself is intimately tied to the conversion event, right? So you have to deal with these things very differently. There's no blanket one-fits-all kind of attribution model there.
Why don't we dig, because that's very, very close to one of these questions here, so why don't we just dig on it a little bit further before we go back to the audience again and talk more broadly about mobile and attribution, right? So, we talked a little bit here about how it can help. We skirted around this idea that going to a physical location can help attribution. Are there other ways that mobile can help attribution? And what if your targeting and your measurement are not using the same thing? So what if you've got a separate channel that's got cross-device measurement, but you're only measuring conversions on one of them? So what about mobile?
Yeah, so I think from at least as it relates to attribution, I think that is the crux of the issue. So if you're going to start marketing, we talked about the benefits of thinking cross-device and marketing it to a user, irrespective, agnostic to what device they're on. It's just leverage that data to put the right message in front of the right person at the right time. If you don't have a measurement system that's going to replicate that, you won't be successful. Because what's going to happen is you're not going to have good data. And at some point, someone is going to look at the results. And if you're not using cross-device data in an attribution methodology, for example, you're going to be buying all this mobile media as part of this strategy. You're not going to see conversions happening because conversions aren't happening on the mobile device. And that stuff's going to get cut out of your budget unless you happen to have an immense amount of intestinal fortitude and a great vision to say, I know in my heart this is really working, and I'm willing to put my career on the line even though the results don't show it.
This has actually happened to us at Magnetic, where people have asked us to do cross-device targeting, which we've used Tapad with. We've successfully done it, but they've been siloed.
And then they cut the budget.
They've been siloed on the back end, so we showed an ad on mobile, and they measured us.
I mean, it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
I'd say don't waste your time doing cross-device if you're not going to measure cross-device, because you're not going to make it work, frankly.
I wouldn't say that because so few people are measuring cross-device. That would kind of screw me, but target cross-device.
Take out the video.
You can put your careers on the line. It's going to work. But
so let's ask that. So if the people here are looking at some sort of, let's say 7-day view-through window on a device-specific basis,
don't do that.
what should they do?
So this is where Google and Tapad can actually be friends. Go buy Adometry. Go buy a Visual IQ that does cross-device attribution. Make sure that your measurement system has caught up with your targeting systems. When I still ran product at Tapad, we actually built out a reporting suite that basically had two options. You can say, here's what your ad server is going to say that doesn't measure cross-device at all, and at least those numbers aligned with everyone else's numbers or with the third-party ad server's numbers. And then you could flip a switch and says, these are what the real numbers are. This is your blind spot. This is what you're missing today. And they had to really take it on faith because we were both doing the targeting and the measurement, that we weren't just making the numbers up.
He's a pretty honest guy, though.
No, I argued for just making the numbers up. Don't get me wrong.
All right, so much for that.
Right, but at least you could say, hey, we understand that the numbers aren't going to align. Here's probably what you're looking at. Here's what we think the real, the value is. And I think the people in this room are smart enough, and the people we talk to are smart enough to understand that if you're a financial services company, if you're American Express, and you're running $100,000 in spend with Tapad on a mobile phone and you don't get any conversions, it's not because there was no value there. It's because no one's going to sign up for a credit card on a mobile phone. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
And so, I think there's a thought exercise where it works. If you don't believe us, go work with an Adometry, go work with another company that can do this. And I agree, they should be aligned. But the nature of what we do is that there's always something that's getting ahead of the next thing, and that's just how it's going to be.
Attribution is really to take into account the fact that users are seeing multiple media elements before they convert. So you want to understand how to fractionally allocate that credit. You have to take it to the next stage and understand that now across devices. And we're starting to see that in some of the results that we're generating. I saw results, this is new, stuff I saw just earlier this week, where we're actually looking at basically conversions by device. And in without cross-device data, I think with cross-device data, we saw mobile share of conversions based on a fractional basis was twice what it was without. I think it went from 10% to 20%. Now, this is a client that does very little mobile marketing. They're just starting to touch on it. And it really shows the value of how important mobile is within those overall campaigns. So you've got to see that, or you're just missing the picture. And it all comes back to the challenge when you rely on Tapad that's selling you the data and the media and providing the results is it's nice data. And when I was a marketer, I get that data. It's nice data, but I have a system of record that I use that my CFO holds us accountable to. And if it's not in that, that's the ground truth. So you got to change that ground truth measurement system. You got to bring that measurement system to the 21st century if you want to take advantage of all this stuff.
Yeah. So an interesting example, building on what Paul's saying. So I was at a measurement and analytics conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was presenting a case study whereby we had actually, so we do a lot of stuff in TV, so we bridged in the Rentrack data, return pass, set-top box data connected to mobile, which is, now you can use the mobile device as a sensor to understand visitation in the physical world. It doesn't do everything, but it does a lot of things. So we did a campaign with a retailer whereby television network was showing advertisements to certain households that we could see to drive them into a retailer. And now we could observe the mobile device movement into retailers. And we had 3 groups that we measured. First group, no TV, no mobile. Second group, so these are households we see, they didn't see the TV show. We showed them no mobile ads. The second group was households that just saw the television advertising. And the third group were households that watched the television advertising and they saw mobile ads as well. And it basically went, conversion X, conversion 2X, conversion 4X. And we didn't do the measurement. The network and Rentrack did the measurement. We just did the location movement. So suddenly, there's two sort of learnings in there. One of which is, so now mobile as an attribution mechanism can be uncoupled from mobile itself and used for television, used for addressable television. So suddenly you've got a real use case where mobile is measuring the effectiveness of TV, which is an incredible breakthrough. And then also you can measure, if I layer on mobile now, what's the effect? And we saw, this is a nationwide campaign, ran for many months, with a really, really stringent measurement mechanism. We saw 4x the conversion when you layered on mobile and TV. And I think that supports this measurement, attribution, as well as the power of cross-device.
Yeah, we've seen that just across everything in digital attribution. When media channels work together on a user, it has outsized impact on conversion.
We at Tapad call it 1 + 1 = 3. We have a report that was the 1
They
+
made
1
that
=
term
3
up,
report.
actually, right? They made that term up.
Well, yeah.
You got a great marketing.
TN?
But you're making up your numbers
We were
anyway.
going to do 1 + 1 = 4, but that seemed like a stretch.
Too much. That's too much.
5. Should have gone 5.
No one will believe that.
Other questions from the audience? Yeah, over here. Let me give you the mic. Thank you.
So I think this one might be for Paul. Recently, I got the beacon notice while I was at point of sale, and I thought it was kind of comical because I downloaded the app and used it for years, and it was kind of really nebulous what they were asking, kind of like, could we please push messages that would save you money? And I'd like you to speak to why, I guess from a permission-based marketing, they felt the need to do that, because it seemed to me I'd already given my consent through usage and through the download. Like, what is special about a point-of-sale beacon where the industry feels like they've got to ask me? Because, I mean, if I wasn't a tech guy, if it was my, somebody else outside of that, they might have just been, well, no, I don't want you to enable beacons.
Lawyers is the reason why that message is there. Lawyers.
Delight the lawyers?
Duncan might be able to talk. I say, the one thing I'll say just about that is, not every marketer or agency person is as smart as the people in this room. So lots of stupid things are done leveraging this technology. I always like to use remarketing as an example. Who's like, I went and bought ski tickets as a couple years ago, and then I got ski lift ticket promotions through the summer. It's like, you know what? I'm not skiing anymore. I don't need to get this, right? I get inundated with stuff. And so a lot of times these tools are used like sledgehammers by marketers, and that's where, again, a better measurement system can tell you how to actually use that. That's just a perspective.
That was an exception.
I don't know.
So we spent a bunch of time bouncing around the beacon space, right? So it's sort of tangential to what we do, waiting for it to get scale.
Yeah, so why don't you take it up just a notch, talk about beacons, and then take it down again.
So if you think about beacons, right, the promise of beacons. So I was on a panel a couple of years ago. Everybody's droning on about beacons. I had to get out. I said, look, can we just say, 2013 is the year of beacons, right? Meaning it's going to be 10 years until anything happens. There were all these beacon guys on the panel, and they were quite upset, actually. And this one guy said, it took him a while to come up with a response. Like two questions later, he's like, well, I just want to respond to that guy on the end. And he said, can we just agree that this is the year of the beacon pilot? I was like, okay, this is the year of the beacon pilot. So what that means is it's been like the savior of retail. So obviously, right, the idea that you go down a shopping aisle and now you use Google or whatever it is, the retailers are losing power. So, oh my God, we're going to put these electronic digital mechanisms in the store, and we're going to take back the digital eyeballs that are going to all these digital companies we don't control, and we're going to do it through beaconings. And the promise of beacons is fantastic, right? Attribution, measurement, in-store navigation, hypothetically, understand your wants, needs, and desires, and say, you want to come down and get the Bud Light, I'll take you straight to the aisle, and here's the limes, etc., whatever it may be. But when I literally had this experience 3 years ago when I was talking to a retailer, and I said, so how are you planning to use beaconing? And they're like, yeah, well, we just want to push coupons, right? I'm like, what, are you kidding me? Like, no, this is the digital version of that flashing, annoying thing that when you walk down the aisle, or it's the same thing when you get the receipt, and you're like, what the hell is this? I've got 27 coupons I'm never going to use. So the problem there is not the technology, the problem is the retailers and the lack of business change and the lack of embracing, we can use this in a whole new way now. That is going to change, right? That's the same thing as the creative thing, where you've got the technology, it takes a long time for the tactics to catch up to it.
And I guess beacons is in addition to using the location data in your phone, it's just more accurate, right? That's because they're different data sets, right?
Another massive misconception, right, is beacons are location aware. They're not location aware, right? They're not connected to GPS devices. They don't know where the hell they are. They have no magic in them. You put a beacon in a store, you have to tell it it's in the store. And by the way, beacons don't do navigation. You've got to triangulate them. You've got to figure out all the interference, and you've got to build a location positioning network with beacons. It doesn't exist. So we started looking at a whole bunch of beacon data. We got it all in, and guess what the lat longs were on the beacon data? For the shopping mall. I was like, well, great. So we knew that anyhow. They're not a magic panacea at all.
I think that's critical, because I've seen that as well several times. Retailer installs the beacon, they put the same lat long on every single beacon in the whole store. Right? So
they don't know the lat long of the aisle, and they don't give a shit anyhow.
And anyway,
right?
It's in the middle of the freeway, the lat long. Like, it's not even...
So it's a lot. There's something like, a couple 100,000 beacon installs in the whole of the US, and as you well know, you have to provision the applications, get permission. It's going to take a long time before beaconing really takes off at scale.
Yeah.
Well, I think that shines a light on something that Nick had said earlier about the gap between the targeting and the advancement of platforms against the creative's ability to put relevant messaging that builds the brand or delivers the goods. And I would just like, maybe Nick, you could speak to what the industry is doing in the mobile sphere to standardize and make it easier for us when we say, hey, we can deliver this relevance audience down to this level. we're looking at a creative director that's like, huh?
Yeah.
What if we're in the Ford dealership, it would be think Ford first. That's, it would be closer to that than it would be a more place-based, I would say, relevant or enlightened thing for the consumer to use. So just speak to the standardization or maybe the advancement of ad technology against all this targeting.
Yeah, so we had a client event this morning, and after the event we played golf. It was fun. I shot about 190. And at the end of the event, we were sitting, sort of talking, and we're talking about this, and he goes, you know what you should do? He goes, at the end of this panel, you should just stand up and say, it's all bullshit.
Like you've done it before the end.
I'm trying to, it's a cue. And I actually don't believe it's all bullshit, but oftentimes in ad tech, we get ahead of ourselves in talking about the promise of some technology versus its actual utility on that day. So I think beacons is probably a good example of that, right? That was 2013. Yeah. I met with a big retailer a couple months ago, and I said, what do you think about beacons? They're like, yeah, we rolled it out to 2 of our stores, but we never plugged it in. Yeah. It was like, all right, well, that's not good. And so, I think there's definitely a problem there. Standardization for me is a double-edged sword, right? Standardization helps everyone in this room because suddenly you have a common way to talk about things, a common way to implement things, a common way to measure things, et cetera. But I think, especially in a lot of the things that we're talking about, right? If you'd gone to Paul 4 years ago and said, let's standardize how we do fractional attribution, he'd be like, well, the entire value of my company is that we're innovating and doing great things that no one else is doing. A standard is going to bring everyone to the lowest common denominator. And so I think you need to find ways to actually continue to innovate, not get too far ahead of yourself. And when you get to a point where you have things that work, that have utility and drive value, then find common ways for everyone to talk about those things. But I don't think you want to put standardization too early in the process because I think that actually hurts the innovation.
So you think it's too early then for...
Yeah, I do. Like search, click fraud. Standardize the shit out of that, right? It's a problem that's existed for 20 years. It's well understood. Google controls the entire ecosystem anyway, so they're just going to standardize on whatever they want to. Things like cross-device and fractional attribution and location-based whatever. Like
too soon, too evolving. You can't,
No, like the value that I'm adding is there is no standard. We haven't figured it out yet. We need to go much farther down this path, and then we'll talk about standardization 5 years from now.
Look at the MRC just rejected Rentrack. Right?
Yeah.
Rentrack's $1 billion public company, right? And they're like, it's not ready for standardization yet, right? So even you're $1 billion market cap company, and you're still not real enough to pass the attribute, to pass the certification.
It's too
from
accurate.
MRC.
It's too accurate.
That could be that. Nielsen may have, I don't know.
That's another story. Yeah. Any other last questions before we wrap up this evening? Yeah, in the back here. Are you loud or do you want a mic?
I can use them both.
There you go.
Whatever. So, going back to some things that you talked around a little bit earlier, the multiple definitions of conversion when you don't have point of sale, or let's say, for example, you work for a large brand that wants to improve their brand image and you plan a lot of media around that. How can the attribution technologies that are available today account for that thing? So like around attitudinal measures, for example, like you're planning and buying media against raising brand opinion. That's very different than point of sale or a conversion that we would equate to point of sale. What are your thoughts on how attribution can help with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, again, thinking in the automotive space, what people buy a new car once every 7 years. And so you want to have that brand top of mind so that when they happen to go through that process sometime in the next 7 years, they're going to think of your brand. To be fair, I think there's some things attribution can do well and there's some things it can't. So, and I don't think attribution is an end-all be-all for all marketing activity. But I do think when you start getting to the point of actually driving a conversion, then that's where attribution can come in. So I would never advocate an advertiser who's doing a lot of brand advertising to get rid of their attitudinal research or brand lift studies. I just think they should do that in concert with an attribution solution to understand that. I think they work together. Now, there are ways that you can start looking at proxies to measure that. So, if you're looking for how maybe your brand-oriented advertising is having impact, another way, instead of just relying on survey results, is we've actually started using search query data which we have a lot of, and we can marry that against your TV spend. It's our TV attribution product. And so, if an ad runs and it drives a lot of search activity, that might be a great proxy to say you're having a brand impact. We'll be adding YouTube data to that, hopefully, in the near future. We just got to get approval internally to do that. And so for brands that really actually drive people, again, you think about automotive, if I see a really cool automotive car, I might want to go online and look at some really cool ads or campaigns or video of that car I just saw on TV. And again, we might be able to track that. So I don't think anything is this end all be all. I think all of these like a mosaic. They're all pieces of the puzzle that come at it from different angles that help you answer that question.
I think you have this reality, right? Look, in some magical future when everything's measurable, and you always occasionally hear advertisers saying, well, like, once everything's measurable, I'm going to know exactly how I spend my money. And you think about this whole brand scenario, and automotive's a great example. I still think, there's so many imperfect, techniques there. You think of the study. So my classic place for sort of checking ads out, I'm on the Weather Channel, that scrolls down. You see an ad for some kind of Swiffer brand, and I scroll to the bottom, and now suddenly there's an ad that says, win $1,000 by filling in this survey. And I'm like, oh, here we go. You click it. It's an Insight Express survey. Literally two scrolls down from the Swiffer ad, and it pops up and it's like, so have you been positively impacted by exposure? Literally, I took screenshots of it. Have you been positively impacted? It's ridiculous. No one's going to be like, yeah, I'm really going to think about these in-depth questions of my brand of Swiffer, the amount of hair it picks up based upon my microsecond ad exposure when I'm looking at the weather. And then there's a flashing banner saying $1,000, and I just think, Jesus, a lot of people spend a lot of money based upon those metrics, and it's so ridiculously imperfect.
Well, and people don't know why they buy things. If you were to go ask someone why they bought a can of Coke, they're going to give you 1,000 different answers for why they bought that can of Coke, when it really is, many of those things, and it's all of those things over time. And so, it really, what advertising is trying to do is change people's minds or impact people's attitudes, etc. People don't understand how their brain works. I have the slightest idea why I have, feeling 1 versus feeling 2. And so if our measurement is going to be, well, let's just ask people why they did something, it's going to be imperfect science. I'm not
to track activity.
Yeah, I'm not a statistician, but I think what you really need to do is find ways to show correlation between certain programs, certain activities, et cetera, in terms of how that actually ends up at the cash register somewhere. It's an incredibly hard thing to do because a person is very complicated and they see hundreds of thousands of messages, but I think you really need to do it. Find the things that correlate, and then there's going to be a leap of faith, right? Correlation is not causation, but it's the best we can do.
So I think I'm going to end for now. We have an open bar and food afterwards. So, and these gentlemen are all here to continue your Q&A on a one-on-one basis. Sort of a very, very quick summary of what I think we discussed today. At the beginning, we talked about the basics of multiple devices, multiple screen sizes, multiple things on those devices, which just makes life complicated. So just that makes life complicated. Then we talked about the fact that really, and I think the whole of the audience agreed already, so there's a little bit of a panacea, but that we really need to be targeting audiences, not devices. So it's an audience-first world, not a channel-specific world.
If a Facebook woman was here, she would call it people-based marketing.
There you go. And I know that, in fact, why don't I give either of you, I'll give you the opportunity, because I know you have these stats, to just quote a couple of stats about the store, because we use the Tapad stats in our own marketing materials, so I know he has the stats.
I would know what they are.
He's got to remember them, though.
Okay, I'll quote them for you, because you're wimping out on it. But there are, the stats all say that, for example, people start shopping on the device that's closest to them. And they finish on the one that's most convenient, right? So what's convenient about filling out a form is very different from what's closest to you. So you're always going to be in this world where you're swapping between devices. And I think it's 2/3 of the people that start on mobile end up on desktop. The stats are better for desktop. You're more likely, if you start on desktop, to complete on desktop. In fact, the highest one is a tablet, ironically. You're most likely to stay on a tablet if you started on a tablet. But all of them have a variety of things. So it's really audience first is important. Then we talked about attribution versus targeting, right? So that's also very, very important. The targeting that we can do, targeting these audiences, if you're not measuring that way, can lead to some really terrible answers where people look really bad. I know it's happened to Magnetic, it's happened to us, as I said earlier on the panel, where we've been penalized for doing cross-device targeting and then measured without it. And so you really, really have to align those two things, or your numbers will just look really bad. And then my sort of favorite, not because he's renting a yacht in Cannes and I get to stay on it, really not that reason. My favorite, Duncan, for the end, because I think it's the imaginative dimension of being able to take that location information and not just use it for targeting because of the location, but using it for attribution because of the location, targeting it with television because of the location, doing these other things, to use the old Arbitron's term, to use the phone as a people meter is a very, very, very powerful thing. And I think we're only just beginning to go along that creative road, and we should all do that. That's what we all do for a living. So thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the food, enjoy the wine, enjoy the liquor, and we're here to answer the rest of your questions. Thank you.